What do a collapsing oil-dependent economy in South America, a U.S. military maritime blockade, and a dramatic two-week chase across the Atlantic have in common? Today, we're unpacking a story that could redefine naval tensions between superpowers. Before we dive into the Marinera tanker incident, you need context. This isn't just about one ship. It's tied to decades of crisis in Venezuela, the world's oil-rich country turned economic failure. Venezuela holds some of the largest proven oil reserves on Earth, but years of mismanagement, corruption, and political turmoil devastated its energy sector. By the mid-2020s, oil production had dropped dramatically from millions of barrels per day to a deeply reduced output. This was not just an economic downturn. It crippled a country heavily reliant on oil revenue. Social services, infrastructure, and basic goods all suffered. Domestic unrest increased as inflation soared and public services collapsed. Economists point to a structural failure compounded by heavy dependence on oil and successive shocks to the global market. In response to Venezuela's political crisis, the United States imposed escalating sanctions, particularly targeting the oil sector, the heart of Venezuela's economy. By 2019 and into the 2020s, U.S. efforts included sanctions on key oil firms, export controls, and restrictions aimed at cutting off Venezuelan oil revenue, a central strategy to weaken Nicolas Maduro's government. These sanctions were meant to disrupt Maduro's access to funds his government used to maintain power, but they also had the side effect of pushing Venezuela to find alternative ways to export crude, often through unofficial and opaque shipping network. As sanctions tightened, a network of older, hard-to-track tankers, often referred to as a shadow fleet, emerged. These vessels transported oil from Venezuela, Iran, and other sanctioned producers in ways designed to evade surveillance and enforcement. These tankers often change names mid-voyage, disable tracking systems, switch flags to claim protection from a state. These tactics blurred lines between legal trade and covert sanctions evasion. In late 2025, the U.S. significantly escalated enforcement. A naval blockade of tankers linked to Venezuelan oil was announced, targeting ships suspected of breaking sanctions. Two very large crude carriers were seized or intercepted in the Caribbean and Atlantic as part of this campaign, signaling a shift to active maritime pressure. At the same time, the U.S. was monitoring tanker movements closely, coordinated with allies to enforce compliance, a major move in the battle over oil routes and geopolitical leverage. Everything changed in early January 2026 when U.S. forces conducted an operation in Venezuela's capital, arresting President Nicolas Maduro and moving him to the United States on serious charges. This was a historic escalation. A sitting head of state seized, and it intensified the geopolitical stakes. U.S. leaders framed it as a blow against corruption, drug trafficking, and Maduro's regime, while critics saw it as a bold strategic move tied to oil interests. One ship became symbolic of this confrontation, a large oil tanker originally known as Bella 1. It was part of the Shadow Fleet, regularly moving sanctioned oil and operating in ways designed to avoid detection and enforcement. In December 2025, U.S. Coast Guard and naval forces attempted to board Bella 1 in international waters near the Caribbean, but the crew refused to comply. Instead of surrendering, the ship turned north into the Atlantic Ocean, initiating what would become a 2-week pursuit by U.S. forces. To evade capture, the tanker underwent dramatic changes mid-voyage. It was renamed Marinera and repainted with the Russian flag, while its registration was moved to Russia. Russia then accepted the vessel into its registry, then formally protested U.S. pursuit, claiming it was now a legally Russian ship under international maritime law. This move complicated the legal status and added diplomatic tension. As Marinera moved northward, the U.S. continued to shadow the ship with Coast Guard cutters and special forces, with allies reporting surveillance and patrol activity around the Atlantic corridor. The pursuit was tracked hundreds of miles south of Iceland, with the vessel heading toward northern European waters or potentially Russia. Then, in early January 2026, reports emerged that Russia deployed a submarine and additional naval assets to escort or monitor Marinera, marking a risky escalation in naval involvement. On January 7, 2026, U.S. forces successfully seized the Marinera in the North Atlantic pursuant to a federal court warrant, citing alleged violations of U.S. sanctions and prior legal claims against the vessel. This was the first known U.S. seizure of a Russian-flagged vessel in recent memory, a development likely to reverberate through geopolitics. Despite the presence of Russian naval units nearby, including the submarine, there was no direct military confrontation at the moment of seizure. The seizure sparked immediate reactions. The U.S. defended its actions as enforcement of sanctions and protection of Western interests. Russia condemned the operation, accusing Washington of illegal aggression and infringement on maritime norms. Analysts warn this incident could reshape how naval power is projected over sanctioned economic networks and might affect future enforcement of maritime law. This isn't just a single tanker story. It's a snapshot of the new geopolitics of oil, sanctions, and naval enforcement. We see how economic pressure can evolve into naval confrontations and diplomatic crises, involving state actors far from their own borders. So what does this mean for global power games? Is it a warning shot from the U.S., a challenge to Russia's influence, or a turning point in how sanctions are enforced at sea? Tell us what you think in the comments. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, make sure to subscribe. Next, we'll break down how this could impact global oil markets and military alliances.